There is a popular belief that the Vegapunk that we just met is not in fact the real Vegapunk, rather what we are seeing is some sort of fake body, some sort of android or robot, with most people pointing to the label of Punk 02 as evidence that the woman we are seeing is a science experiment serving as Vegapunk's mouthpiece. Which begs the question, why would he create such a woman? And that is the far more interesting theory that I'll be breaking down today, that this android is in fact a recreation of a real woman, Sora, Judge's wife and Sanji's mother, all stemming from the fallout of the mad science group and potentially a broken romance between Vegapunk and the original Sora. And big shoutouts to Dr. Farewell, who was the first person I know to point out that the quote-unquote Vegapunk that we are seeing here may in fact be a robot version of Sora from Germa 66. I initially got the idea from Dr. Farewell, and I'm going to be adding all my own reasoning that I see as to why this could be the case over the course of this video. I'll be explaining first why it is likely that this woman is not the real Vegapunk, and second, why we can trace this back to Germa 66, and really all of it back to potentially being foreshadowed long ago in this little comic strip that runs in the World Economic Times. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe. And I'm curious, do you like cash? If so, you should be using Upside, the sponsor for this video, to get major cash back when you purchase from gas stations or restaurants. This app is completely free and just gets you money back for free. And to be clear, it's a lot more money back than just normal credit card benefits, and it's pretty much automatic. The app just shows you what restaurants or gas stations near you will get you cash back, you can claim the offers, and then when you go to that restaurant or you go to fill up gas, you get a discounted rate. There is literally no reason not to use it. It's like suddenly I have a bunch of coupons for places around me that I would normally go to anyway that I can just claim with a touch of a button. It's already been saving me several dollars at my nearest gas station. I also get automatic discounts at my favorite Italian restaurant now. And anytime I'm traveling, I'm always checking for places in new locations that offer Upside discounts. And seriously, if this sounds too good to be true, it's not. It literally has 4.8 stars on the App Store. It's just an app that gets you free cash back. Just go use it, it's amazing. And you all can get an extra bonus for signing up through me. Just download the free Upside app and use code MORGE to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Link in the description below. So that aside, to begin with, is this the real Vegapunk or is this some sort of proxy robot? First of all, the reality is that throughout the series, Vegapunk has always been referred to as a man. Even Kuma, who had direct contact with Vegapunk, who has seen Vegapunk as Vegapunk has personally experimented on him, states that Vegapunk is a man. Now, there is a possibility that Oda retconned this at some point and decided it would be more fun if Vegapunk is a woman. There is also the possibility that there was no retcon, that this was always the real Vegapunk, and that the man that the world government normally sees is in fact a robot body. However, there are other factors that also suggest that this isn't the case and that Vegapunk is actually a man. First of all is of course the Punk 2 label, which is the manner in which we would expect science experiments to be labeled. Second is the fact that Vegapunk was not given a title card the way we often expect One Piece characters to get when they are officially introduced. And most interesting is Vegapunk's style of speech, which is supposedly that of an old man's. At least that is what those who are much more proficient in Japanese than I am, such as Arthur, have been saying. So all of this together, considering Vegapunk has been repeatedly stated to be a man throughout the story, the style of speech that they're using being characteristic of a man, the lack of an official title card introduction, and the strange science experiment style labeling, all coupled with the fact that it would just make a lot of sense that the world's most valuable scientist would stay holed up in Egghead Island rather than coming out to deal with run-of-the-mill intruders and engage in combat situations personally. I think that there is at the very least a decent probability that this woman is not the real Vegapunk, but an android or robot of some sort. And at the very least, for the sake of entertaining the far more interesting full theory that we're looking at here, let's just make the assumption to start with that this isn't the real Vegapunk for the sake of the theory and see how far this rabbit hole can go down. So the first time we really got an idea of the lore behind Germa 66 as this evil army, what were we told about? That Germa was this army of evil that always fought against this warrior of the sea, Sora. Now we know of course that Germa is an army of advanced technology, and Sora seems to be a futuristic warrior as well based on his gun and the mech robot that accompanies him. Interestingly, Germa are always portrayed as the bad guys, whereas Sora, based on his symbol, seems to represent the side of the Marines and the world government. Now, I believe that these conflicts depicted in the newspaper were not pure fiction. I think that this mythos of Sora versus Germa 66 was in fact based on the real-life conflicts between Vegapunk and Germa. So let's trace things back a little bit. We know that there once existed a group of scientists known as MADs. This included Vegapunk, Judge, Caesar, and Queen. However, once the group fell apart, Vegapunk was brought over to the side of the world government, whereas it sounds as though Judge and Germa were painted out to be this army of evil. Now, it was always curious to me that in the comics about Germa, they were always fighting against a warrior known as Sora, when Sora was in fact the name of Judge's wife. The real Sora was part of Germa 66. How did the myth spin into the notion that Judge and his family were fighting against the mother of the family? And why then were there these added details of an accompanying mech robot and a seagull sidekick? Why did the Sora of this story represent the Marines and the world government? Well, we know that there's no love lost between the MADS members. I mean, from the beginning, we could see the resentment and hatred that Caesar held towards Vegapunk, trying to blame the Punk Hazard incident on Vegapunk. And we know that Judge and Vegapunk in particular were focused on the same project: mastering the science behind bloodline elements in living beings. And from what we see the two of them producing, they certainly seem to be two sides of the same coin. So far, Judge's greatest creations are his army of clone soldiers and his own children, who have been made into emotionless killing machines. Whereas Vegapunk also has created a considerably more impressive army of clones and has also created maybe the most dangerous killing machines in existence. However, we know that things ultimately fell apart between Judge and Vegapunk, and MADS is no more. Again, Vegapunk is now the most valuable asset of the world government, and Judge and Germa are labeled this army of evil. Now, what's interesting is that when this woman emerged, this woman, who we are currently assuming is some sort of science experiment of Vegapunk's, she, much like the Sora of the original comics, was accompanied by a giant mech with her. From what little we saw of the World Economic comic strip, it does seem suspiciously similar to the mech that is featured there. And the woman herself does bear a resemblance to the real Sora, Judge's wife. Though of course One Piece women's designs are often pretty similar, one of the most striking similarities between this woman and the original Sora is the hair, the classic staple of Sanji's family members. Hair that covers one eye. If anything, the woman that we're seeing here seems like she could be a younger version of the Sora that we saw in Sanji's flashback, which makes sense as Vegapunk would have recreated the version of Sora that he knew back when he was still working with Judge, which took place, of course, years before Sanji's flashback. Again, where did this idea of Germa and the army of evil versus Sora, warrior of the Marines and the world government, and his giant mech and seagull, where did this idea come from? It seems so random, particularly because the real Sora just doesn't fit as an inspiration for the comic. The real Sora, well, she was a part of Germa 66. So what if the myth stems from the conflict between Judge and Vegapunk? Vegapunk, after all, being the scientist that represents the Marines and the world government. And what if the manner in which Vegapunk chooses to fight is through his own robot creations, such as, say, a robot warrior and a giant robot mech, which is what we see depicted in these comics. And what if the reason that the robot warrior depicted in these comics is named Sora is because Vegapunk chose to name his first creation Sora after the woman that he loved? Because what if Judge and Vegapunk both loved the same woman, the original Sora that we see? So in that case, why is the Sora in the comics a man? Well, who knows? Maybe Vegapunk had an earlier model that was male that he deployed for combat. Maybe the woman that we're seeing right now is a later model of Sora, and this one was literally modeled after the original Sora rather than just being named after her. And a fun additional little possibility is that considering Vegapunk lives on Egghead Island, maybe Sora's seagull sidekick is in fact based off of a pet seagull of Vegapunk's that hatched from his new home on Egghead Island. Just a random extra thought. So in theory, Judge and Vegapunk worked together once upon a time, both exploring lineage factors. There was a woman named Sora involved. And at the point that MADS was broken apart, perhaps there was some sort of a love triangle between Judge, Vegapunk, and Sora. Vegapunk goes on to become the world government's prize scientist, and Judge and Germa become known as an army of evil. Vegapunk may have been heartbroken over losing Sora, who has gone with Judge, and so Vegapunk may have named his first android creation after her, hence Sora, Warrior of the Sea, featured in the World Economic Times. From then on, perhaps Judge and Germa continue to come in conflict with Vegapunk now that they're on different sides. And those battles may have been depicted in the World Economic Times comic series, showcasing of course Judge and his evil army on one side, and Sora, the android creation of Vegapunk named after the woman that he lost to Judge, as well as an accompanying giant mech warrior on the other side. In these comics, Sora is of course representing the world government and the Marines, and Judge is representing evil. And finally, the woman that we're seeing here today may simply be a later model that Vegapunk created, this time an android woman that looks deliberately very similar to the real original Sora, the woman that Vegapunk loved. Now, this may all be nothing. At the end of the day, maybe this is the real Vegapunk. Or even if it's not the real Vegapunk, maybe this is just some other random woman robot that Vegapunk created. Maybe it's the recreation of his daughter that he lost, or his own wife that died, or something. Maybe the World Economic Times isn't meant to be read into too much. Who knows why Sora is a warrior of the future fighting against Germa in the comics when the real Sora is actually Judge's wife. However, there are some extremely interesting thematic points to consider here that suggest that Vegapunk's story may in fact be based off a tragic romance. First of all, we know Vegapunk as this genius who is able to essentially create life. Vegapunk is able to create perfect, superpowered soldiers that obey. That is what the Pacifista are, that is what the Seraphim are. However, Vegapunk is not the first scientist to play with life in this way. In fact, before Mads, before we learn about Vegapunk, Judge, Caesar, before all of these guys, we had Dr. Hogback. In Thriller Bark, that is the first time we were given the story of this genius doctor, who, much in the manner that Vegapunk and Judge create perfect life forms, this doctor focused on bringing back the dead. Both the creations of Judge and Vegapunk and the creation of Dr. Hogback are unnatural creations, and most importantly, why are they unnatural? Because, as Vegapunk points out immediately, it's the issue of free will. The attempt to create something that is molded in exactly the fashion you want, to do exactly as you want, simply does not work because free will exists. A lot of this is likely important for the themes of One Piece in general and the final conflict with the world government that's going to be focused on in the final storyline, but that's a video for another time. Point being, the issue of free will is what is always pointed out as the problem with making creations like Judge, Vegapunk, and Hogback have done. We got a bit of that highlighted in Whole Cake Island, we have Vegapunk highlighting that now, and with Hogback, the biggest scene that highlighted the problem with his creations and free will was with Victoria Sindri. Think back to the story of Victoria Sindri, a woman that Hogback loved while she was alive, but it was an unrequited love. And so after she died, Hogback recreated his own version of her. He recreated the woman that he loved, who he could not have in real life. Of course, the issue of free will was his downfall at the end of the day. Even if he created a model of Sindri, his model ultimately rebelled. That also has huge implications regarding the future of the Seraphim and such, but let's keep it focused to parallels with Vegapunk for now. Is this woman we are seeing, is she Vegapunk's version of Victoria Sindri? Because it's possible that Vegapunk may have lost Sora to Judge, and so Vegapunk recreated his own version of Sora. And in this introductory chapter, Vegapunk may have already foreshadowed the eventual problem with this recreation, which is free will. It's also particularly interesting to me that in the Thriller Bark arc, an arc entirely focused on playing with life and death and creating these obedient soldiers, these ideal servants, that is the same arc that we first learned about Dr. Vegapunk and the experiments that Dr. Vegapunk has been working on to create perfect soldiers as well, starting with Kuma, the first Pacifista, PX0. I really do wonder if Vegapunk's story was initially foreshadowed through Hogback's. And I wonder if that leads to another discussion on free will versus control, as this seems like the perfect setting to finally challenge the existence of these various creations of science from these various science groups that have been being produced. The numbers, the Germa clones, the Pacifistas, the Seraphim, etc. The morality behind all these may be explored, especially considering Vegapunk brings it up right away to kick off the arc. So let me know if you believe this woman is Vegapunk or the recreated Sora in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and consider supporting me and this channel through membership you can join below.